Welcome. You're watching Rugby with Rifle, a podcast about all things rugby and life, with your host, Danny Pabone and Rifle Scudder.
Welcome to Rugby with Rifle, a podcast about all things rugby and life. As always, I'm joined here with my friend Rifle. Rifle, how are you doing, sir?
Doing very well, thanks, Danny. How about yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Another episode talking about rugby, which is a great conversation as always to have. And to continue in this line of, because this podcast was created, its origins was teaching the game of rugby specifically to the American audience in the United States, but not only in the United States, to any fan, sports fan that doesn't particularly follow rugby, that they should be because it's such a great sport. In that tradition of teaching the game of rugby, Rifle, we just wanted to go over a specific play in the game of rugby that you will see often if you were to watch a match. And that specific play is called the lineout. And again, if you're new to rugby, we could just go over what a lineout is and how you set up on the field and the reasons for the lineout and when does a lineout occur. So let's get right to it, Rifle here. So when I first started learning about the game of rugby, and before I started watching the game, Rifle, really the only play that I knew from my experience, again, my little experience of the game of rugby, was the scrum. And that's probably something we're going to talk about in another episode. And for those of you who don't know, if you watch the game of rugby, the scrum are the two teams crouched and they're in a group crouch and they're pushing up against each other. And if you were to say, hey, what's the game of rugby? That's the picture I would give you. It's like, it's a bunch of guys, two teams, crouch, pushing up against each other. I have no idea what the heck is happening, but that's all I know about the game of rugby. But obviously that has changed over the past couple of years. And I've come to fall in love with the game of rugby, again, thanks to you. And another play that's specific to rugby is called a lineout. And as everybody can see here, a lineout, this is the formation of the lineout. And Rifle, if you could just briefly explain how a lineout comes about, and this, a brief explanation of what the lineout is all about.
Okay, let me start by saying, talking about the scrum, you are correct because whenever I spoke and still do speak to Americans about rugby and ask them, have you seen rugby? Do you know rugby? The first thing they say is that the game where you got these big guys just pushing. That's all they do. They push, and what the reason is for, I don't know, but big guys, that doesn't make sense. So that's a scrum, and that's called a set piece. There are a couple of set pieces in the game of rugby to restart the game when a mistake happens. If one team does something wrong, the other team gets the opportunity to take the ball and then start off a set piece. For example, the scrum where they push, or the line out that we can see in this picture over here. So you're right, Danny. People just talk about those big guys pushing each other and they don't know why. But fortunately, there's so much more to the game of rugby than just that. So without reading the sentences there on the right-hand side of the picture, what I'll say is a line out is literally two teams. So here you got your yellow and your red team. You got the forwards, which are separated from number 1 to number 8, and they literally form two lines next to one another whenever the ball goes outside of play. So that would be your line out. The reason the line out occurs is because the rugby ball went, what we say, into touch. In other words, it went outside the field of play. So
That's called
there's
a touch line here.
the touch line. So when the ball goes outside of the touch line, then a line out will occur to restart the game. That's the reason for a line out. So now every time a line out happens, there are certain rules that both teams have to adhere to. There are certain rules that both teams you will see them on the field. It looks a bit different because at a line out, you will have one team that are the defending team, and they have certain rules that they have to stick to, and the other team who has the ball, the team throwing the ball in, so they get to put the ball in. In this circumstance, it's team yellow, it's their line out. So they will look a little bit different, especially in the back line. So from players 10 to 15, then you'll see red team defending. But both teams have to follow the next couple of rules or laws. And should you break one of these rules or laws, you could get a free kick given to the other team or maybe even a penalty. So another thing in rugby that we must remember is we don't work in yards or feet. Everything is meters. So I'm not making a mistake here when I say 5 meters, it's 5 meters, not yards or feet. So as you can see there, it says there is a 2 meter, the first guy there in the red. He has to be 2 meters from where all the other guys in the lineout are going to stand. But all the other guys in the lineout have to stand behind the first marked line on the field there, which is the 5 meter. So between the yellow player throwing the ball in and where the guys line up is a 5 meter distance. You have to stay clear of that 5 meters if you are jumping in the line out. And then all the guys in the line out have to fill that formation and they cannot go past the 10 meter line. There's 10 meters there that they have to stand in. So the two lines will line up next to each other, and there has to be a meter in between the two lines. So they can't stand shoulder to shoulder. There has to be a meter space between the red team and the yellow team. And the red team and the yellow team, they will line up between a 5 meter line and the 15 meter line. So that gives you 10 meters that they have to stand in. And that is the basics of the line out. So here you have team yellow, their hooker, number 2, he will be throwing the ball in, and his aim would be that one of his jumpers will jump and catch the ball, and then they will pass the ball to the guy standing there, receiver 2 meters away from the line out, and then he would play the ball from there. He can kick, he can pass, he can do whatever he wants, but a line out happens when the ball goes into touch. The team that gets to throw the ball in, they can call, they can do a trick play, they can do whatever they want, but both teams have to line up next to each other, a meter apart, in between the 5 and the 15 meter line. That's the basics of a line out.
Yes, and
Not clear there.
yes, and thank you, Rifles, for that. And again, you touched upon this briefly before when we began the episode. Rifle is, if you were to see a match of rugby, you would think, this game, there's not much to watch. It's so simple. I don't know what the big deal about rugby is. It's Oh, you scrum, you do lineouts, and people tackle each other. So what? Big deal. But once you learn the rules and the strategy behind the rules and all that stuff, and you have, not to get too deep into this, but you have great minds such as the head coach of South Africa, Rassie Erasmus, and other great coaches, Cartier from France, Farrell from Ireland, and so many other great rugby coaches. The beautiful thing about rugby is, and Rassi is great at this, is he studies the rules, I mean, very, very intricately, and then he finds ways to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Push
He
the
finds,
envelope.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Push the envelope.
There you go. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. He pushes the envelope, and it's funny. And again, I just wanted to stick this in here. He pushes the envelope, and then you have people complaining, "Oh, how? Why did he do that? That's no fair." And then eventually, other people start doing what he's doing. Um, and I say all that to say is, once you start watching the game and you start watching how the different teams uses the line out, uses the scrum, uses other things that we're going to learn, we've taught, but we're going to continue to talk about a rolling maul, and all other different types of plays in rugby. Once you you see coaches becoming creative on how they execute these different plays, it becomes fun to watch and to see when a team, any rugby team that's great and that's doing well, once you start seeing how they take the rules and they come up with different ways on, I guess, they come up with different interpretations of those rules. They're still following the rules, but they come up with different ways on how to execute those rules. It becomes a lot of fun to watch and see the chess match that happens on the field once these great teams go on the field and try to, I guess you could say, outsmart each other.
Right. And the thing is, just like in American football, people talk about the playbook, and different coaches have different styles of playing. Some coaches are more
Yep.
defensively inclined, some coaches more attacking. But every player has to understand the X and the O's. So if you call a play, it doesn't matter if going to get the ball or not going to get the ball. You must know exactly what everyone is thinking, how things should go for this play to work. And if you look at a line out and you see, okay, there, 8 guys standing next to each other, someone's going to throw the ball in. If you understand the intricate details that go into a line out and the specialized thought patterns that go into trying to always have one step in front of your opponent and how to do that. It's amazing what happens in a lineout. The calls. I still to this day, I remember when I was playing, we start in primary school in South Africa, so you are 6 years old. So when I was under 6, I can still remember my lineout call from under 6. And what would happen when I was under 6, the scrum half, which is the guy who's going to receive the ball, he would either have his hands on his knees, which would be meat on meat, and meat was very expensive, so we would throw, that would be a number 4 ball, or he would have his hands on his hips, which would be his hands, flesh on material. Material was cheap, so that would be a number 2 ball. And that's the only call we had. But every time there was a line out, we would watch the scrum half. If he had his hands on his knees, it means we were throwing to number 4. If he had his hands on his hips, we were throwing to number 2. That was at 5, 6 years old. So obviously now, many more different ways of calling, but I remember, the calls from different years. I can tell you what we did in the lineout. So
Wow.
another thing in the lineout, when we form a lineout, both teams have to be 10 meters away from that line in the middle. So both teams, when they line up, they are a meter from one another, and you draw an imaginary line right down the line out, and both teams, the back line, so the players who are not involved in jumping and playing in the line out, they have to be 10 meters away. Should they, for whatever reason, come closer than 10 meters, a penalty will be given to the other team. So that's what you can see, those two guys there and those lines that both of them have. So that's
That is
another
called
thing to
a
watch out.
that's called an offside. So if what you're saying, Rifle, is if these players that are 10 meters away from the actual line out, if those players were to start moving forward before the ball is thrown into play, that would be considered a offside, and the team that commits that penalty hit their opponent will receive the ball.
Correct, but it goes a little further than that.
Okay.
There are certain rules that indicates when the line out is over.
Mm.
So certain things have to happen before the line out is over. So if those teams on both sides are 10 meters away, if they encroach, if they come closer than 10 meters before the line out is over, not necessarily before the ball is put in, even if the ball is in and they come 10 meters, there's certain rules that the ref will say, okay, line out over. So even maybe the ball is in already and it hasn't touched the player, or he's just touched the ball, they're not allowed to come closer than the 10 meters. And we have there on the right-hand side, there are 3 or 4 reasons why a line out would be finished. And now we will have the next phase of the game. For instance, maybe a maul or a ruck or a kick or a pass. But they have to stay 10 meters away, both sides, until the line out is completely over. And I believe in today's game, when you watch a line out, the referee will have his hand up. And when the line out is over, he'll let the guys know by bringing his hand down many times. Then they know, okay, we can go closer now to participate in the next phase of whatever it's going to be. So
Wow.
that
Okay.
is not just before the ball, that's even after the ball. You've got to hold your 10 meters. Very, very important.
And therein lies the contrast between rugby. Well, when it comes to the line out, because in my mind, in football, once the center on the offensive line hikes the ball, in other words, once the movement of the ball goes from the center to the quarterback, then the defensive line could charge the quarterback. So once that ball moves from the center, as soon as he picks that off the ground, the defensive line players could go attack the quarterback and the offensive line. However, you're saying in rugby, just because the ball is moving in the air doesn't mean that these players could move and attack their opponent. And as you point out here, the end of the line out, as you just said, the end is when either this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Rifle, is when the receiver moves out of the line out. That's the end of a line out. If the ball is hit by any of the players, whether it's the receiving or the defending, if the ball is deflected and hits the ground, that's the end of a line out. Another end to the line out is if the ball passes the 15-meter line here. Once that ball passes that line then again, these players could move forward and attack. So there's the difference there, because in my mind, from just American football, once that ball starts moving, the defense could start attacking. However, that's not the case in the lineout in rugby.
Right. Just the very first one there, the receiver, you said when the receiver runs and he passes the back line. So in other words, he goes past the back, then the line out is over. Not necessarily so. When the receiver takes the ball and he runs a meter,
Oh,
or
okay.
he passes the ball, then the line out is over. He doesn't have to pass by the 10-meter or the 15-meter mark at the back of a line out for it to be up, because
Okay.
maybe he goes to the front of the line out and he runs in front of the guys. He's not going to go to the back. So, but when he gets the ball and he goes a meter either side with the ball, then the line out is over.
Okay.
Then they can
Gotcha.
come up,
Gotcha.
because he can choose to kick the ball, he can choose to pass the ball, he can choose to go back into the forwards if he wants to for some or other reason. He can come to the front of the line out, but as soon as he gets the ball from the line out guys and he starts moving a meter, then the line out is over and the guys can come up. So his team will come up to attack, and the opposing team, the red team in this side, they will come up to defend. So they're the four reasons that a line out will be over.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Wow. Amazing. And again, add all the different ways of executing the line out, and you just be amazed at this specific set play. And I know you had sent me a video of different lineouts, rifle, and maybe I'll just show that once I edit this episode of players when the ball is coming into the lineout. You see players taking advantage of space on the defense, and one player running through the middle of the line out, catching the ball, and boom, taking off and running. So there's already quite a few ways to execute this line out. So yeah, it's pretty cool to watch. And just another thing, Rifle, here is, if we could just speak about, and we pretty much have spoken about this a little bit over the past few minutes, the different techniques that are used in order to execute the timeout, not the timeout, I'm sorry, the line out, and a few of the benefits here. I already spoke about one technique of, looking at the defense, and then the defense, if one of the players that are involved in the line out sees the defense spread wide, uh, you know, the receiving team could take advantage of that and take the ball and run straight right through the middle. If you could just speak to, generally the different ways of executing the line out.
The most popular, or as we would say, 99% of the time, you would throw to what we call a catcher.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, most of the time, that would be either your number 2 or your number 4. Not numbers 2 and 4 on the back of the jersey, but number 2 jumper in the lineout and number 4 jumper in the lineout, which for most of the time will be your 2 locks. So
Mm-hmm.
that will be your number 4 and number 5. So on the back of your jersey, you will have a number 4 or 5 if you're a lock. And many, many times you will hear people talk about he is a 2, and understanding the game, that will be he jumps at number 2. Or he's a 4 jumper. That means he's the 4th player in the line who catches the ball at number 4. And there you've said lifting on point number 1. So when these guys, as soon as they get their feet off the ground, their teammates can help them up and lift them high. And it's shocking to see the height that these guys go. If you see a proper photo of a good line-out jumper when he's in the air. I mean, these guys are 6 foot, some of them 6'9". And now the guys are picking them up as high as they possibly can to catch the ball. So it's amazing to see. But that is what would happen most of the time. You would throw the ball to your number 2 jumper or your number 4 jumper to try get the ball back. As you said, sometimes there could be different ways that you want to trick the opponents. So you can do trick plays. There it says a dummy call. Another way that you can also make a difference in a lineout is if the hooker, the number 2 on his back, when he throws the ball in the lineout, he chooses not to use the forwards. In other words, the guys that are lined up. So for a trick play, he will throw the ball past the 15-meter line, and he will throw it to a center who's attacking. He's running into the ball. So as soon as he throws the ball, his teammate will come running from the back line and then grab the ball while on speed. That's another way that you can play the line out. So there are many, many different ways that you can try and fake out your opponents, or just as we say in the world of rugby, your bread and butter, you go to 2 and 4, 2 and 4. If you're in trouble and you need to make sure that you can depend on your life, that if this is your line out, what are you going to do? You're going to go straight to, that's a bread and butter call. The guys know the call. They've practiced it. You are going to win this ball. You have to. So there's no time for tricks, or there's no time to be fancy. I need this ball. This is win or lose. And then your bread and butter plays, 2 or 4. You just throw it to them. But even in that, can you go one slide back, Danny? If you look there at the number 2 will throw the ball in. So the number 2, the hooker, has the ball there. 99% of the time it will be the number 2. And that's another wonderful thing in rugby, because many, many times from a line out like this, you will have a backline player. So maybe a wing on the other side of the field. So here you're looking at the field. So on the left-hand side of the field, you'll have the left wing, and he's right on the other side of the field. Many times the aim is, after a line out like this, you want to get the ball out quick so the left side winger can score. And when everything works well, and it happens that the left wing goes and he scores a try, no matter how brilliant his try is, do you know that the whole team has to come back all the way to that number 2 who threw the ball into the line out? Because if he threw the ball skew, or he misheard the call, or he misjudged the call, and instead of throwing it to number 2, he threw it to number 4, so the other team got the ball. I mean, there's so many things that can happen and go wrong. If number 2 is jumping, the number 1 and the number 3 player has to lift him up. If they didn't support him properly, he wouldn't catch the ball. So there are so many things that go into a guy scoring a try. And you don't think about, you watch these players today, those hookers, they stand for hours and they just throw the ball, and they just throw the ball. And when I was playing, they've got techniques and they've got equipment now that you can use. But when we were playing back in my day, you would just stand next to or 5 meters away from the rugby posts, and you would take that ball and you would try and hit the post. Like people playing basketball, they stand and they do their free throws, and they just throw and they throw and they throw. And I've heard of people, until they make 50 in a row, they don't go home. They have to practice so that they can do it with their eyes closed. And that's what that number 2 does as well. Just throws and throws. So he can literally practice so that he can almost do it with his eyes closed. There's a rugby podcast. It was started in England, and 2 British international rugby players, they started, it's called For the Love of Rugby. And they have this podcast, but they've started another one, For the Love of Rugby, but they have 2 South African players. And the English guy is, you got the scrum off and you got the prop. So the prop is the one who pushes, and the scrum off is the guy who puts the ball in. But in South Africa, for the love of rugby, the people who do the podcast are both props. So the conversation is very different because a scrum half and a prop, two very different positions where two props, all they do, is scrum and push. So it's wonderful to hear the two different podcasts. And because one is English, the language, the accent, the culture, just everything is different. But, it's just on rugby. But the last week, the South African For the Love of Rugby, they interviewed a guy called, his nickname is Brannas, which means brandy. Like, we drink brandy and Coke. So his
Just a
nickname is
little bit.
Brannas, brandy. And he is Dion. He was 37, I believe, when South Africa played against New Zealand in the World Cup final. 37 years old. And the only reason he came on is because all our hookers got injured. He was a number 3 hooker. You had Malcolm Marks, who broke his leg. He was off. Then you had Bongi Mbonambi. They fell on him, so he was off. So Dion, who was thinking maybe he'll play 10 or 15 minutes, he came on 5 minutes into the game. He had to play the whole game. But they were saying in that podcast this past week, how many times after a game or before practice or after practice, he just stands and he throws the ball and he throws the ball and he throws the ball, so that when it really mattered on the biggest stage of the rugby universe, the World Cup final, South Africa against the All Blacks, he had thrown the ball in so many times that he could almost do it with his eyes closed. And that's one brilliant thing about rugby, is no matter how good the guys that score the try, they have to go all the way to the guy who threw the ball in, the guy who jumped, the guy who supported him, the pass, all of that. So it's really, really a team sport, and that's what makes it so wonderful.
Wow. Wow. And yeah, it's just, again, just going back to the game looks simple, but the amount of time that it takes to really, like you just mentioned, really looking at each position and realizing that, again, in rugby, all 15 players are important. It's just the way it is. Because even when you look at soccer, you have the position, the midfielder, who's also known as the striker. That's the person that's usually the fastest, has the best dribbling skills. Soccer, some people think dribbling is basketball. No, in soccer, when you dribble the ball back and forth between feet, that's called dribbling in soccer.
Yeah.
The best dribbling skills usually is the striker, that is the one that's the fastest and the most skilled, and usually they're the ones. A lot of times they're the ones that usually score, because they're the quickest and the most talented, quote unquote, on the soccer field. But in rugby, you may have a player that's well known and that's very good, such as Antoine Dupont. However, you know, you could have an Antoine Dupont on any team, but if the other 14 players are subpar or not that great, what's the point? Antoine Dupont, it's not going to be Antoine Dupont. Yeah, that's unique in my eyes. It's very unique that if you want to have a great rugby team, every position you have to have a player that gives it their all. Those are going to be the great teams. So yeah, it's very unique in that aspect.
Yep, that's exactly how it works. And if you have an amazing player like Dupont, and his forwards, the 8 forwards, are under pressure the whole game and they keep on going back, so the other team scrums them back, they're not winning their lineouts. Doesn't matter how good he is, if he's playing on the back foot and he's under pressure all the time, it's more than likely that he's not going to be that brilliant if he's playing from a position on the back foot all the time. And if you want to see that happen, you can actually go to the Six Nations and you watch Scotland versus France. And you look how different DuPont looked during that game because the Scottish forwards were relentless. And they put so much pressure on the French up until the last 10 minutes or 12 minutes of the game. But until then, if you look at DuPont, you think just an average scrum half. But he's brilliant. But man, he was just as I say, under the pump, just so much pressure the whole game that, man, he was even battling. Even the great DuPont didn't look as brilliant as he really is because of the pressure.
Yeah, yeah, and that was something to watch there. Um, and I believe he had he com was that the game he committed quite a few errors in that game because there was so
Oh,
much
yeah,
under
that's the one
pressure.
where he was in his own try line. He passed forward
Yeah,
to Bell's. People are like, what do you do? I mean, that's the greatest scrum off. They say, look, how can you pass forward? So
rookie
pressure.
mistake. What is that?
Yeah,
What's that?
pressure.
So yeah, yeah, it's truly a all 15. You have to be all in and hands on deck. And one might argue, you know, in American football, oh, but that's true for American football. Um, I guess you can make that argument, but in American football, if on the offense you have a great quarterback and a great receiver or a couple of great receivers, those two positions can make a huge difference, um, regardless of who you're playing. For the most part, it's not that's not the case in every case, but for the most part, if you have a great quarterback and a great receiver, those two positions can make a huge difference in the game. It's not the case in rugby. You have to have all 15 players playing great and doing their best and really their minds in the game in order to come out with a victory, for the most part. Uh, of course, you may have South Africa or France or New Zealand playing the United States, and nothing against the United States rugby team. That's a that's a whole different story. South Africa could probably play 50, 60% and still beat the United States.
And
But
that's
that's a whole
comparing
nother
apples to oranges, though.
that's a whole nother podcast. But hopefully over the next few years, the US team will be more competitive with the growth of rugby. Hopefully
Definitely.
that's our prayer with the game of rugby in the United States.
We hope so.
So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, taking a deep dive into the set play known as the lineout in rugby. Rifle, once again, thank you for your knowledge of the game of rugby. Thank you for you introducing me to the game of rugby. It's
Just a
been a
pleasure.
great pleasure to learn the game. And once again, what a game of rugby it is. And it's funny because this past year, I watched, if you would put it into percentages, with me being a huge American football NFL fan, I would say between American football and rugby, it was probably 60% American football and 40% rugby, when it comes to me watching matches. Obviously, I can't watch every single match. But if I
Mm.
were to do a breakdown of percentages, it was probably 60-40. Uh, a year and a half ago, it would have been 100-0.
Right.
So
In other
yeah,
words,
so
2027, it will be 40-60.
yes, in rugby's, maybe that'll be the case. And in a few years, it'll be like 90-10, ninety
There we
percent
go.
rugby. So again, thank you, Rifle. With that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, take care, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you for watching this episode of Rugby with Rifle. Remember to press the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet to support this podcast.